Hello, everyone, and welcome to My Thoughts Exactly. I'm your host, Charles Baran. When people think of Fort Lauderdale, they usually think of hot, sunny beaches, the spring break madness, beautiful four-star hotels with ocean views, and the 1960s film Where the Boys Are, which starred Connie Francis and Paula Prentice. In fact, that film, which premiered in 1960 in Fort Lauderdale, kicked off the tradition of spring break when 50,000 college students 3 months after the premiere descended on the streets of Los Olas Boulevard and A1A. That tradition still continues to this year. Also a part of Fort Lauderdale's rich history, but not quite as well known, is the summer home of American artist Frederick Clay Bartlett. The property, known as Bonnet House, was built in the 1920s and sits on almost a quarter-mile of prime oceanfront land on A1A between Northeast 9th Street and Vistamar Street. So this week on a hot, sunny 85-degree Florida day, Kirk and I decided to head to the beach and check out Bonnet House. The grounds are stunning, so let's go take a look. Frederick Clay Bartlett and his second wife, Helen Birch, started construction on Bonnet House, a Bahama-style plantation house in 1920 on 35 acres of land given to them as a wedding present by her father. Sure beat a toaster. Bartlett was primarily known as a mural painter and a designer of stained glass windows. His work was highly sought after. In fact, when he returned to the United States after completing art school abroad, he made $60,000 a year in commissions. That was in the early 1920s, equivalent to over $1 million a year in today's money. Bartlett set up his studio on the grounds of Bonnet House, and several of his paintings are still on display. Others, like these, are in the collection of the Smithsonian American Museum of Art. While her husband painted, Helen Birch Bartlett collected art, mainly post-impressionist and modernist art. Her collector's eye was so great that her collection included Pablo Picasso's The Old Guitarist, and George Seurat's Un dimanche après-midi à Île de la Grande Jatte, or better known as A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, or even better known as the inspiration for Stephen Sondheim's musical Sunday in the Park with George. Not too shabby, right, Bernadette? Helen unfortunately died a short 6 years into their marriage, and Frederick gave the 25 paintings in Helen's collection to the Art Institute of Chicago, which promptly opened the Helen Birch Bartlett Memorial Collection to display the Picasso, the Seurat, the Cézannes, and Van Goghs, and her vintage Tupperware collection. Just kidding, the Tupperware is still in the house. Enough about her. Back to Bonnet House. A few years later, Frederick remarried to Evelyn Fortune Lilly, his third wife. I know, he had a first wife that I didn't mention. Not too much is written about her. They had 3 children together, only one of which survived into adulthood. She died shortly after the 2 children died, back in Chicago. This was pre-Bonnet House. I asked the tour guide what the first wife died of, and he sadly said the death certificate stated exhaustion. Anyway, Evelyn Fortune Lilly, the third wife, was previously married as well, and her first husband was, you guessed it, Eli Lilly Jr. of the pharmaceutical gang. You think she was loaded? She was 14 years younger than Frederick and was somewhat of a painter herself, but I don't think her work is in anybody's collection. Well, maybe her grandkids? Sorry, I couldn't find a picture of her. Frederick and Evelyn did enjoy their life together on the vast estate. They kept adding and making improvements to the house and grounds. The house is furnished in a primitive style, reminiscent of the Hemingway house in Key West, without the cats. There is an amusing story about this mural. When Frederick finished painting it, it didn't have the net around the turtle. Evelyn looked up and said, "My dear Frederick, something is missing." He handed her the paintbrush and said, "You finish it." So she added the netting. Anyway, when Frederick died in 1953 at age 80, she stayed on in the house, spending summers there roaming the halls. In 1983, she decided to bequeath the house and grounds to the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation with the caveat that she be allowed to live in the house for free until her demise. If you catch my drift, that means no electric bills or water bills and no property tax bills on oceanfront property. She was 96 at the time, so the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation were kicking up their heels, thinking in a year or two they could turn it into a museum and make some cash from the tourists and rent the grounds out for weddings and bar mitzvahs. She fooled them. She died in 1997 at age 110. Evelyn liked to party. Her favorite spot on the property was the orchid house where she raised her orchids and entertained in the adjacent bamboo tiki bar where she liked to mix her favorite drink, a Rangpur lime cocktail, gin, simple syrup, soda water, and lime juice for her guests, which probably included members of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation checking up on her health. I'm dedicating this show to Evelyn, who seemed to me like the sharpest tool in the Bartlett family shed. Listen, if those Picassos and Cézannes were hers, she never would have given them away. It was really hot over at Bonnet House. I made a fan out of my Bonnet House map. Oh, and in the gift shop, I got this really great book called Fort Lauderdale, the Venice of America. It's the history of Fort Lauderdale, with all these really great vintage photos from the late 1800s and the early 1920s. It's really an awesome book, and I can't wait to sit by our pool in the shade and check it out. I have a big surprise for you. Next week on episode 103, we're heading over to the Wick Theater, which just reopened with a COVID safety production of A Chorus Line. I'll be interviewing several of the cast members. I'll be speaking with people over at the Wick about the precautions they took to reopen the theater and how everyone is feeling safe and welcome there. So join us next week for a visit to A Chorus Line at the Wick. Thanks for watching the show, everybody. It's so great to have you watch every week. I love each and every one of you. If you like the show, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. I'd love you to see the show every week. Bye-bye now. Love you.